our fourth speaker is still on his way, so we'll start. This is our 51st Tahrir dialogue. 51st or 31st? 31st Tahrir dialogue. I added 20 intentionally. And our topic today is about Egypt and the Nile Basin. For those who are new to Tahrir dialogues, this is a series of dialogues we have started at the School of Global Affairs and Public Policy right after the 25th of January revolution, in an attempt to reach out to the community at large in Egypt and invite people from all walks of life to share with us an hour discussion of many hot topics that are of interest. We've covered so many issues so far related to the constitutional amendments, to fighting corruption, to getting back the embezzled funds by the previous regime, to seeing how to manage political parties and especially coaching young youth activists on how to participate in elections and how to manage election campaigns. We've had these panel discussions over the past 2.5 years, and usually they are held in Tahrir when the security situation is permissible and when the guests are also finding it difficult to move over here. But this time we are lucky to have our guests agreeing to come to the new campus, and therefore more of our graduate students as well can attend. We have 4 prominent speakers on our list, and the session will be moderated by Dr. Ibrahim, Awad, Professor of Practice, Public Policy and Administration Department, and Director of the Center for Migration and Refugee Studies. Dr. Ibrahim is the graduate of the Faculty of Economics and Political Science, Cairo University, and he has a PhD in Political Science from the University of Geneva in Switzerland. Dr. Ibrahim Awad has held positions with regional and United Nations organizations in various countries around the world, including Argentina, Spain, Switzerland, Lebanon, and Egypt. And he acted as director of the International Migration Program ILO headquarters in Geneva for a long number of years, from 2005 to 2010, and previously held a number of positions also at the ILO for being the sub-regional office director for North Africa, and before that secretary of the Commission for the United Nations Economic and Social Commission for Western Africa. We are also pleased to have with us Ms. Fatma Zahraa. Ms. Fatma Zahraa is Second Secretary for Nile Basin Country Affairs and NileWaters at the Egyptian Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Ms. Zahraa worked as a diplomat at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs Office of the Assistant Foreign Minister and General Coordinator for Nile Basin countries and NileWaters. Before that, she was a diplomat in the Embassy of the Arab Republic of Egypt in Tanzania, and earlier, from 2004 to 2006, she worked as a researcher in the Americas Department, League of Arab States, and earlier in 2003, she was also posted in Venezuela. She supervised many developmental projects in Tanzania and targeted the most vulnerable groups of society. We have Dr. Hamid Ali, the Assistant Professor, Public Policy and Management Department, and Dr. Hamid Ali. His area of teaching is in public policy theory, research methods, public financial management, economics for public policy analysis, applied quantitative analysis, globalization and development. Prior to joining AUC, he taught at Southern Methodist University and was a consultant at Management Optimetrics as senior economist. He holds a PhD in public policy from the Lyndon Ben Johnson School of Public Affairs at the University of Texas, Austin, a master's in macroeconomics and econometrics from the University of Texas as well, and an MA in economics and management science from the University of North Texas, and an ESC from the University of Khartoum. He has practical experience on how the government's agencies operate. He worked for a number of years as a researcher at the U.S. Government Accountability Office. He was a major contributor on various reports to congressional committees issued related to the U.S. Army's chemical and biological units. Dr. Hamid also has a long list of publications about the use of military expenditures and the best balance between military versus developmental expenditures, and he is also an activist as related to Darfur issues. We're expecting also Dr. Khaled Abuzeid. He's on his way, Regional Water Program Manager, CEDARE. Professor Khaled Abuzeid has a PhD in Civil Engineering and Water Management, Colorado State University, and is a registered professional engineer in the state of California, USA. Has 25 years of experience in the water sector, numerous writings about water management, and he has been the team leader of the Nile Decision Support System Conceptual Design, first and second Arab State of Water Report, and other publications. So I hope we will enjoy our discussion for the day. And I leave the mic to Dr. Ibrahim Awad to moderate the session. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Tahrir, for the presentation. Good afternoon, everyone. I am not a speaker. In fact, I'm just moderating the session. I'll just introduce the discussion. The subject of today of this Tahrir dialogue with Egypt and the Nile Basin, and this is a very important issue for Egypt. This is obvious to everyone who is here and to everyone who lives or who has known Egypt. Egypt, everyone knows about Egypt being the gift of the Nile, even if some Egyptians do not like that. Some Egyptians say that Egypt is not, as Herodotus said, a gift of the Nile, but that Egypt is the gift of the Egyptians, that the Egyptians built Egypt. I think personally that this is true. However, without the Nile, it would have been difficult to have all this population living in this. In fact, the valley of the Nile would not have existed, and Egyptians are very proud of the concept of the valley of the Nile. Egypt and the Nile Basin Egyptians not only depend for the lives of the Nile, they have an emotional attachment to the Nile. The Nile is something, is a creature that Egyptians love. It's not only a material life, but there is something spiritual and something very emotional, I repeat, about the Nile in Egypt. All the same, Egypt suffers deficits in water. The Nile had provided Egypt with water for thousands of years, but now the water per capita is diminishing. And diminishing in a region where, in fact, water is a very scarce resource. So we have a country in the region where in a really dismal water situation, even worse, much worse than Egypt. However, we have a problem of water supply. And this problem has been now compounded by what is heard here and there, and what is being repeatedly discussed about the outcomes of the building by Ethiopia of the Renaissance Dam. So the Renaissance Dam has ignited or reignited interest in the Nile. Egyptians took the Nile and took water for granted for thousands of years, but now they have awakened to the situation where their beloved Nile may not bring sufficient water, in fact, for them to sustain it. So we have to deal with it. We have to deal with that. And at the same time, we have to take account of the wish, very legitimate wish, of the upstream countries to develop. We know that upstream countries are even more underdeveloped than Egypt is. and upstream countries also say they have cases. I think that we should not ignore the cases that upstream countries have. They say that agreements over the Nile River were concluded in colonial times, and that these agreements were unequal. Is this true? Is this not true? There is a case here to be debated. And I think that you cannot address any issue unless you respect the arguments of the others. And then Egypt also, their source of life and the water that makes this life possible. So this is a real conflict, which is the essence of politics. The essence of politics is conflict, and probably conflict between contrasting objectives which are legitimate. The objectives of the upstream countries are legitimate, the objectives of downstream countries are also legitimate. In the middle of this, each and everyone should preserve their own interests, and in fact, out of this interaction of interests, that the solution can come about. I think that Dr. Laila Al-Baradi has introduced our speakers today, and we're very lucky to have them with us. In fact, we have Dr. Hamid. Dr. Hamid is from a downstream country, but a little bit upstreamer than Egypt. Very interesting also to look at the situation of Sudan. We'll learn a lot from him. And we're also very, very lucky to have Ms. Fatma Zahraa Abdel Kawi with us. She is in the Egyptian policy-making process as far as this Nile or this conflict, this dispute over the River Nile waters, and the issue, how far and as far as the issue is concerned. So we'll also learn from her. We'll learn from her what the dimensions of this issue is and how Egyptians are approaching this issue. Ms. Fatma Zahraa, the floor is yours. Will you talk for 15 minutes, for instance?
Yes,
Okay.
exactly, or less. Thank you very much, Professor Awad. Thank you very much, Professor Baradi, for the very good introduction. And I'm here today with you to learn from you, not to tell you something new, but to discuss and to learn from you. I will have 4 remarks for my introductory remarks will be 4. The first one is about my office. I'm working for the Office of the General Coordinator for Nile Basin Countries Affairs and Nile Basin Waters. He is the Assistant Foreign Minister for this issue. And through our office, all activities which is done by the Egyptian government and recently by the NGOs, by non-governmental organs or organizations or institutions is going through this department or this office, because we found that there are duplications and there are overlapping in our activities in the Nile Basin, in Nile Basin countries. My second remark will be about the Egyptian reliance on the Nile. As Professor Awad said, from time immemorial up until the present, the most extensive user of the Nile water has unquestionably been Egypt. It builds barrage, dams, canals, and diversions. And the better utilization of the Nile in Egypt is born out of the necessity because the country's life and settled agriculture are fully dependent on it. Besides the scarcity of water resources, Egypt is facing a very rising demographic pressure, the highest population growth rate in the whole basin. It doesn't only need to maintain its share in the Nile water, which is 55.5 billion cubic meters, but also to increase its water resources to confront its tantamount demand. These 2 main factors made any concession requested from Egypt during the negotiations, which took place for more than 10 years with its co-riparian states, impossible. However, at the same time, and starting from 1990s, Egypt recognizes that each state has the right to equitable utilization of its waters in accordance with the international law. going hand in hand with the two main other principles, which are no harm and prior notification. Egypt further recognizes that existing water agreements don't hinder the utilization of the Nile waters by any of the riparian states. In this regard, Egypt has moved on two tracks. The bilateral tracks, which is through bilateral cooperation with Uganda, Kenya, and Tanzania and Ethiopia. And for example, Egypt was ready to cooperate with Ethiopia in exploiting its huge hydroelectric power potentials and didn't object to the construction of small-scale water dams. The other track is the regional track, and in the late 1990s, Egypt came to realize that an integrative and comprehensive framework among Nile riparian states will be of a huge importance to it and the other riparian state. My third remark will be about the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam. And I took out this remark from the email which I received from the department for this dialogue. It was written exactly in the email because it is a common error in the media and in the writings about the dam. It is saying that Egypt has demanded it be allowed to review the dam designs before giving Ethiopia the green light for the project. This is not the case. This is a common mistake which we can find in the media and the writings, as I said. The first sentence of the terms of reference of the panel of experts which is studying the dam now is saying that the GERD, the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam, is under construction. It means that Egypt will not accept or refuse. It is a status quo. It is the real state now. The government of Ethiopia has invited in good faith the two downstream countries, Egypt and Sudan, to form an international panel of experts to review the design documents of the GERD, provide transparent information sharing, and to solicit understanding of the benefits and costs accrued to the three countries and impacts, if any, of the GERD on the two downstream countries so as to build trust, confidence among all parties. So it is not that issue that Egypt will give the approval or will not give the approval on the dam. It is already under construction. My fourth remark will be about the updates about the Cooperative Framework Agreement, which is the agreement signed till now by 6 countries and has not been yet ratified. The Nile Basin Commission, which was supposed to be established according to this framework, hasn't been established because according to Article 42 of the CFA shall enter into force on the 60th day following the date of the deposit of the 6th instrument of ratification or accession with the African Union. Until now, it is not ratified by any of the six countries. And now, what about the NBI, the Nile Basin Initiative, which is the provisional institutional organization which is governing the Nile Basin till now? We all know that after the signing the CFA by 6 of the riparian countries, Egypt and Sudan decided to freeze their activities in the NBI as a sign of objection on what downstream countries did. The freezing reached as well to the sub-basin organizations, I mean the Eastern Nile Technical Regional Office and the Nile Equatorial Lake Subsidiary Action Program Core Unit, and as a result, NBI project and all the previous benefits coming from it stopped, except for some training courses, seminars, or workshops. In order to solve the actual deadlock, Egypt tried to make many moves with Nile Basin countries through many initiatives to go back to the negotiating table in order to find a solution to this actual deadlock. But all till now failed to achieve that goal. And the question now, which one, any one of us can ask here, does bilateral cooperation stop with all this failure? The answer is no. Bilateral cooperation increased. For example, Egyptian investments in Ethiopia reached last year $2 billion. The Egyptian government's assistance to Nile Basin countries, which was mainly channeled through the Egyptian Fund for Technical Cooperation with Africa, increased. Not only that, Egypt initiated in 2012 the Egyptian Initiative for Development in Nile Basin countries. It contains many projects in many fields. For example, in the investment sectors, we have training courses, we have excellency centers built in these countries, and in agriculture, we have pilot farms with Ethiopia, pilot fish farms with southern Sudan and DR Congo, biological fight of water weeds in Sudan, and training courses of small farmers. And in the water and irrigation, we have MOUs with Nile Basin countries for digging boreholes, training courses, building early warning systems, and encatchment areas for rain with small dams. And we have as well scholarships for master's degree in irrigation and water resources and for PhDs, especially with Ethiopia. And in the health sector, we have medical convoys. We are inaugurating soon many healthcare centers in these countries. And in electricity, we have a big project for electrification of villages in remote areas by photovoltaic cells. And in telecommunication, our big project we have inaugurated during the Francophonie Summit last year. It was a big culturama in DR Congo. Again, thank you very much, Professor Awad. Thank you very much, Dr. Baradei. And I'm expecting a lot of questions from you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Ms. Fatma Zahraa, for this intervention and for having told us about how Egypt goes about this conflict, this dispute over the waters of the River Nile. But I don't want to be long, but what I just noticed that in fact what Ms. Fatma Zahraa has told us brings out something which is very common in international relations, the continuum between conflict and cooperation. There is conflict, and at the same time there is cooperation. There is no relations that are completely broken in international relations. And in fact, this is the example of how conflict can coexist and live at the same time with cooperation. Hopefully cooperation will take the upper hand, and conflict will be reduced. I will leave the questions, and I personally have a question with regard to the principles of no harm and prior notification that I would like you to take up later. But for now, I give the floor to Dr. Hamid.
Thank you so much. Thank you for Dr. Ibrahim Awad. I am not going to speak about the positions of Sudan about the water, because Sudan's position is the same as Egypt. It's annexed to Egypt, so there is no much difference between those positions. But what I will try to go over it is, rather than a static position that people are talking about it, I'm going to look from the dynamic aspect of the water issue. It is a historical evolution that are taking place. The Nile Basin is evidently passing through a critical time and uncertainties, and the old order imposed by the lower riparians, particularly Egypt and Sudan, which are monopolizing the Nile Basin for centuries, is being systematically challenged by the new realities and the demand from the assertive upper riparians country. So, Egypt and Sudan should not be bunkered on the legal arguments, because much of the arguments is coming from the legal arguments. They need to find a creative solution to meet the growing demand on water by either conservation or by augmentation of the water flow. So this is the one that I will try to emphasize. In that discussion, I'll talk about remarks on the political geography of the Nile Basin, treaties and the dispute over the Nile waters, and genesis and attempts towards the cooperation. If you look at the political geography of the Nile Basin, it's going to give you these contextual frameworks. That is, the Nile Basin is an area that extended over 11 countries. The share of the river is about 300 million people are sharing this water. By the year 2030, it's going to be 500 millions. Okay? For example, if you look at the Nile, the mind is always to look at this portion. Imagine that the Nile is coming from the hills of Burundi and Rwanda. It's coming from there, for example, like the White Nile that we have it. It will come through the, getting through all those sudut, what we call it, those swamps, and it will go through this evaporation and seepage before it is resurrected itself and coming all the way to Egypt or to Sudan. The other thing that is very important, that is 86% of the total flow of the Nile water is contributing by coming from Ethiopia. And 14%, the remaining 14% are coming from the equatorial lakes. Yet Egypt and Sudan use almost the entire flow of the river. That's why the other countries are objecting to it. And the other thing is also, one thing that is complicating the matters is not only the Egypt and Sudan are consuming the entire flow of the water, but on the other hand, they are also bunkering around the Nile colonial treaties. And one thing that is also very important, that is, not all the water treaties was concluded during the colonial era. Some of them are colonial eras, others are post-colonial era. For example, if you look at one of the biggest dispute is the Nile Treaty of 1902. This has happened between the Ethiopian Empire, Menelik II of Ethiopia, with the British. And at that time they said, the quote, engage himself toward the government of His Britannic Majesty not to construct or allow to be constructed any work across the Blue Nile, Lake of Tana or Tasna, or the Sobat, which would arrest the flow of their water into the Nile, except in agreement with His Britannic Majesty government and the government of Sudan. So it was the treaty that Egypt was using pretty much against Ethiopia. And Ethiopians are vehemently rejecting this treaty, claiming that it was done and never been ratified by any organs of their government to begin with. And also, the Amharic version of this treaty is different from the English treaty. So this is the point that is the Ethiopians' position is. Another treaty that is the major source of dispute was in 1929, called the NileWaters Agreement. This is concluded by Britain on behalf of its East African colonies, including Kenya, Uganda, Tanzania, and Sudan on one hand, and Egypt on the other hand. On the paragraph 4 of this agreement said that, except with the prior consent of the Egyptian government, no irrigation work shall be undertaken, nor electric generator installed along the Nile and its branches, nor on the lake from which they flow, if these lakes are situated in Sudan or in a countries under the British administration, which could jeopardize the interests of Egypt, either by reducing the quantity of water flowing into Egypt or appreciably challenging the rate of flow or causing its health to drop. So it looked like this is also another treaty that people are bunkering through all the negotiation. The other one is in the 1960s. This is in the early 1960s. We have seen that country of the upper riparians start resurrecting themselves, and in the 1960s we have seen that Kenya, Tanzania, and these countries are coming out and resurrecting their doctrine, and especially the Tanzanians. They call it the Nyerere doctrine. In the Nyerere doctrine, they say that is, they gave that the treaty concluded during the colonial era 2 years to be either renegotiated or it will be lapsed if there was no negotiation. So these countries are also saying we are using the Nyerere doctrine. Now what we have is the third treaty was which one? This is the treaty between Sudan and Egypt, that is 1959. And this is the word that is most of the media are talking about and everybody's talking about it. And this is between two people, that is, they don't own this creature by themselves, but they agree that is they're going to take this creature all together. And this is what they called Egypt and Sudan, they allocate the entire Nile water flow that is coming to the Swan dams. It's going to be all confiscated by Sudan and Egypt. So this said agreement is totally rejected by the other riparian states, which argue that they are not parties to it and have never acquiesced to it. As a riparian, they consider the claim of Egypt and Sudan to the entire flow of the Nile an infringement of their rights under the international law to be a reasonable and equitable share of the Nile waters, given that the entire flow of the Nile originated within their territories. Okay? So they are rejecting it. They're saying, yeah, we have equal access to the water. Okay? So if you look at from these arguments of the equal utilization of water, equal access to the water, these countries also, they are claiming the same right, and I think that is even international law will be favoring their positions to begin with, because whether we look on all the UN's convention or the water courses, or etc. Now, if you look at the genesis and attempts towards the cooperation, this is a new beginning, because there are now the other countries are coming out from the ashes of the colonialism and asking for the similar treatments, and they started the negotiation, which was a positive steps where Egypt and Sudan are also coming together. And they started from 1970 up till 1980. There was negotiation going on. This is like an understanding. They need to understand each other pretty much. And this is also another thing that's very important. The way that Sudan and Egypt looking for the Africans in that period is quite different. It's coming from the lenses that is, these are Egypt and Sudan, to some extent, they are too much attached to looking north than looking south, even though Sudan should be at least cross-bridging between the north and the south. Unfortunately, it becomes a position that decoupled with the Egyptian position, that is, at the end, both countries are paying a price for it. Now, the other thing that is very important is that these countries are working on, okay, I'll get there. The good thing about it, the cooperation they come out was called the Nile Basin Initiative, and this initiative was a positive steps towards recognizing each other, and they are working on. The only thing is there is a two dichotomy over there. Some people are calling for the equitable utilization of the water resources. There are others that call for the the holding harmless, means we are really the rule of harmless, no harms. In other words, we don't want to see that our equal share will going to be reduced. If you look at, and now what we have, that is the Nile Basin Initiative is come to become what they call it the cooperative framework, Nile Basin cooperative framework, and this framework is not bad. I think it's not bad. For the first time, 11 countries are coming together to join their ranks, try to put some sort of a meaningful proposition and meaningful things. But what it is still the issue of countries want to hold their historical shares become one that make this framework never took a place. Other countries went ahead and ratified. It's illegal, of course. It's going to be very illegal because some parties refused to sign it on it, and the initiator or the sponsors, they didn't recognize that is what will happen. The differences are huge over there. Even the definitions. What is a Nile River is it we talk about the Nile River or we talk about the Nile River system? Egypt favoring the Nile River system, Egypt and Sudan. The other countries, they are favoring Nile River only. That's the definition of differences. Whether we make the decision based on a majority vote, whether consensus, Egypt and Sudan saying consensus. If there is a majority, then Egypt and Sudan got to be on that column of the majority. The others saying no, let's make it as a simple majority. There is a lot of differences over there. If you look at the Ethiopian Renaissance Dam, okay, this dam actually is not consuming that much of water, rather than reducing the flow of the water. But if they organize it to make the flow in a sequence of years, it will automatically refill it without affecting the flow of the Nile. But it needs to have some sort of a way that they will find it out to make it reasonable, because they are not consuming water. They are not consuming water for any other purposes other than generating the electricity. I have 1 minute, so I could run very quickly. The other thing that is very important, the amount of the water that Egypt is consuming, it's not a lot. It is about 2% of the Amazon River. Okay, it's a very smaller amount. But the thing is, the flow of the Nile is reducing. So what are the mechanics that people try to increase the augmentation of the flow of the Nile water? This is the one that people need to look at it. And the most important thing for the African countries, neither Kenya nor Uganda, they are after water, but they want to get a recognition for their rights, and then that's what they are looking for. And I hope that the Egyptians right now, with the current, what I was talking to Zahraa, and I think they are in a right track of engaging with these Africans in a constructive and the trade and commerce, create a conducive environment, understanding the mind of the Africans, because these are the countries that are coming out from the colonialism, and they don't want any sort of a hegemonic trend. Nobody looking for them to twist their arms. So hopefully we can share that culture all. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Hamid, for this extremely rich and interesting presentation, and in particular, thank you for presenting the arguments of the upstream countries. You have presented very well, I think, the arguments of the upstream countries. You have talked about the different agreements in colonial times and post-colonial times, and you have talked about Egypt's and Sudan's position, and how they were the country that benefited most from the waters of the Nile. You have also talked about the difference in the definition of what the Nile is, whether it is the river or the system, the Nile Rivers system, and then you also addressed the effects of the Renaissance dam, and finally we talked about the attachment of upstream countries to have the rights recognized, and I think you have laid the grounds for negotiation that can reach agreement. I think what is most interesting is that you made us see that agreement is possible, that a conflict can be avoided. Solutions are reachable. Thank you very much for that. Now we welcome Dr. Khaled Abuzeid, who has joined us. Dr. Khaled has been introduced by the Associate Dean, Dr. Al-Baradei. So without much ado, I would ask Dr. Khaled to speak for 15 minutes if he wishes, and then we will have discussion.
Thank you very much for this kind invitation on such an important topic, and also a dear topic to my heart, which is the Nile Basin and the issues associated with the Nile Basin. I was hoping there might be a chance to maybe show you a couple of slides to give you more of the insights and the flavor of what I'm going to be talking about today. But I think the setup is made more for a discussion rather than making a presentation, which is okay. But maybe if it's okay, maybe another time maybe we can elaborate some more on the issues. First, I'd like to give you some facts about the Nile Basin, the Nile River Basin. As you know, now it's shared by 11 countries, of course, after the separation of South Sudan. The Nile Basin countries, if we talk about the countries themselves, they receive rainfall of about 7,000 billion cubic meters per year of rainfall. The Nile Basin countries, they have an area of about 9 million square kilometers. while the Nile Basin itself is about 3 million kilometers square. So the rainfall that the Nile Basin receives is about 1,660 billion cubic meters per year. So we're looking at 11 countries that some of them have other water resources than the Nile itself. If we look at the Congo, for instance, it has the Congo River, which discharges into the Atlantic Ocean a flow of about 1,200 billion cubic meters per year of flow. That's about maybe more than 20 times what Egypt is using, which is 55.5 billion cubic meters per year. The reason why you have these different numbers, I have heard my colleague here saying that Egypt and Sudan have been using all the waters of the Nile. He also alluded to the point that there was some discussions and disagreements on what term to use, the Nile River or the Nile River system. Actually, it's not the Nile River system. The issue is Nile River system or Nile River Basin. Because the basin receives a flow of or a rainfall of about 1,660 billion cubic meters per year. What used to reach Aswan before the High Aswan Dam was built was a flow of about 84 billion cubic meters per year. That's not the entire flow of the Nile, though. That's not the entire amount of water resources or renewable water resources that the Nile River Basin receives. This is the flow that reaches the end part of the river, or that used to reach the end part of the river at Aswan before building the High Aswan Dam. So this was the what you may call the discharge, or the remaining discharge of the whole entire river basin, which used to be flowing there, and it was some of it was actually used, and about 30 billion cubic meters per year at that time used to flow to the Mediterranean Sea without use. And that's when Sudan and Egypt came to an agreement to utilize this amount of water that used to reach that part of the river. However, the river itself receives flows and discharges flows throughout its entire length of about 6,700 kilometers. You know, this is the longest river in the world, and it has a lot of tributaries. So there is a lot of changes that goes on the tributaries of the Nile. If you look at the Sud area, for instance, in the southern part of Sudan, that part evaporates about 400 billion cubic meters per year of evaporation. And it receives rainfall of about maybe 500 billion cubic meters per year of water, of rainfall. So there is a lot of ins and outs throughout the length of the river itself. Now, somebody may say, no, still, this flow at the end of the river is 84. This is all everything, and the rest are just not there. But if we look at other facts, for instance, there's a lot of rain-fed agriculture in the Upper Nile. We shouldn't be looking only at irrigated agriculture. Maybe Egypt, because it depends on the water from the river itself. It's 100% dependent on the water in the river, so it depends more in its agriculture on irrigated agriculture. But if you look at Ethiopia, for instance, it depends more on rain-fed agriculture. In fact, the rain-fed agriculture area in Ethiopia is much more than the irrigated agriculture area in Egypt. Now, this is not the only factor. If the area is bigger, it doesn't necessarily mean that the water that it consumes is bigger. However, if you do the calculations, you will find that it consumes more water than the irrigated agriculture in the basin, in the entire basin. Otherwise, where is the rest of the 1,660 billion cubic meters of rainfall that falls on the basin. 84 out of 1,660 is a big difference. And that defines what I want to introduce here is the terms blue water and green water. And this is now, it's a new term that has been used for the last maybe 10 years or so, and it's internationally recognized, and people are now assessing how much of the green water is being consumed. Green water is the water that's used directly from rainfall in rain-fed agriculture, grazing lands, forests, all this water that's used from the moisture, directly from the rainfall, and from the soil moisture that receives this rainfall. Now, if we look at the livestock production, for instance, you know that Sudan and Ethiopia have 2/3 of the livestock production of the entire continent of Africa. We made a little calculation to look at the livestock that produces meat, not just cattle, I mean not just any type of animals, but the livestock that is used for meat production. And you know that 1 kilogram of meat requires 15,500 liters of water, each kilogram of meat. That's how the cattle uses the water for drinking, uses the water for the natural pasture that the grazing land that it uses. So if you do a little calculation, we did that actually, and we found out that if 1 kilogram requires 15,500 liters per kilogram to grow or to produce 1 kilogram of meat, and we did some other calculations, we found out that this livestock production in Sudan and Ethiopia consumes about 150 billion cubic meters per year. That's 3 times, that's only for livestock production. And that's about 3 times the share of Egypt from the Nile, or how much Egypt is using currently, 55.5 billion cubic meters per year for all its uses, agriculture, industry, municipal, drinking water, everything. So this just gives you a flavor of the importance of not to ignore the green water or the water that is used from rainfall directly. And this actually also gives more opportunities for cooperation and for understanding, because it doesn't make sense to leave the 1,660 billion cubic meters of rainfall in the basin, or the 7,000 billion cubic meters that are within the countries, but maybe outside the Nile Basin, and fight over a very small portion, 84 billion. It's a very small portion of water that unfortunately is getting a lot of disputes and agreements. And I think there is an American say that we should be looking at the half full glass portion of the glass, or something like that, not to look at the empty part of the glass. Now of course, there has been some talks about the agreements, the previous agreements, and the issue about whether to really adhere to these agreements. Some of them are called to be during colonial times, but there are many arguments also, because if we don't agree to those agreements, so this means that even the boundaries, the borders of the countries of all over the world will not be accepted, because they were done during colonial times. But I think that we need to go beyond these kind of agreements and look at the future and how to make use of the losses also in the system. There is a potential, for instance, in the Nile Basin to make use or to increase the blue water in the river, to increase the yield of the river itself, the flows in the river, from the losses that happens in the Nile Basin, of about 18 billion cubic meters. So this 84 billion that's at the end of the system could be as easily increased to 18. Of course, not all of them would reach the end part of the river, but they would be shared. They could be shared by the countries that can cooperate on developing these kind of projects that can improve the yield of the river itself. If you look at the NBI, the Nile Basin Initiative vision, shared vision, it was calling, and all the countries agreed to that, and it was calling for making use of, and here the equitable utilization, not the equal utilization. There's a big difference between equal utilization and equitable utilization. And it was calling for the equitable utilization of the waters of the Nile River Basin. Didn't say the Nile River at the time, said the Nile River Basin. Even the cooperative framework agreement that was unfortunately signed by some countries and not the others, at some point it was also saying equitable utilization of the waters in the Nile River system and the Nile River Basin, both. And the version that was negotiated until the very last moment, before it was finally signed by some countries, actually had this in its articles. If you go back to the ones that you may find on the website, Article 4, it mentioned that. Unfortunately, the one that was signed didn't have that portion. The countries that signed it deleted that portion, which said equitable utilization of the Nile River system and the Nile River Basin. And there are also some other issues that were mentioned by the previous speaker about the cooperative framework agreement. The decisions are to be by consensus or by a majority, and I think that in cases like this kind of river, where there is an impact of any structure or any thing that happens upstream may affect countries that depend 100% on the blue water or the river water itself, I think it's important that the rights of the downstream are also similar to the rights of the upstream. The upstream countries depend more on the green water, some on the blue water. They may depend on the blue water or the water in the river for hydropower potential. That does not necessarily have to affect or impact the countries downstream. This doesn't say that all the countries should use the water in the river itself for irrigation, but maybe the use the water in the river for hydropower potential upstream, and maybe use rain-fed agriculture for upstream. There are good opportunities for agreement on cooperation type of projects. If rain-fed agriculture, for instance, in some areas is not sustainable, it could be supplemented by groundwater that may not affect necessarily the flows of the river that is already actually being used by some countries downstream. There may be sharing of benefits of hydropower generation. The Renaissance Dam, for instance, that's being talked about. I don't think that we I believe that a country should especially if it's a country upstream, that it should unilaterally build a structure that would affect a downstream country. But maybe if these countries come together, they could agree on a design of the structure that would minimize impacts, a model that would actually generate or maximize hydropower potential without minimizing or decreasing the hydropower potential downstream of existing structure. Maybe they can also decide even on joint investment in this structure, if they're all going to be benefit. We see the problem of energy and electricity in Egypt, for instance, and that they may make use of hydropower generation in the Renaissance Dam, for instance. But this doesn't go by talks. There has to be an agreement on this particular structure. There has to be discussions before the structure is being built. Right now there is a tripartite committee studying the impacts of the dam while the dam is being built. Doesn't make sense, huh? You should do that before the dam is being built. It should be studied together, and if there is a joint benefit, there might be a joint investment even in the structure, so that everybody is benefiting. You hear also that Ethiopia sometimes say This structure, or this waters behind the structure, is not going to be used for irrigation. It's not going to be used for withdrawals for any other purposes, but it's just going to be used for hydropower. Now, shouldn't